All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Is that okay with you gents in the back there? Okay, very good. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining our panel today. This is on buying, building, and investing in global EdTech. My name is Adam Nordin. I'm a partner at Goldman Sachs. Really appreciate everybody taking the time to listen to our conversation and in particular to hear the perspectives of our panelists. I'm going to ask each person to come down. We don't need backgrounds and so forth, but just please say hello, introduce yourself to the crowd, and then we'll get started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anjali, Kayal. I work for Skillsoft on our corporate development and strategy team.
Good morning. I'm Krishna, Vedati. I'm co-founder and CEO of Tynker. Recently got acquired by BYJU.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rich Yang. I'm president at Course Hero of our vertical businesses and corporate development.
Good morning. Adam Klaber, Vice Chair and Chief Operating Officer, Imagine Learning.
Hardeep, Gulati, CEO, PowerSchool.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. So maybe to get started, I'm just going to set a bit of the contextual backdrop. I think all of us are here at the conference because we appreciate that there's just extraordinary opportunity in the space that we refer, broadly speaking, to education technology or EdTech, and we're going to unpack that a bit today. But it's a pretty extraordinary vertical to focus in because you see tremendous organic growth. It's highly fragmented, which means there's lots of consolidation opportunities. And most importantly, there's a high velocity of innovation, which brings new companies to the sector. And if you put that into the context of what's happened just in the last 5 years, there's been tremendous change in infrastructure, in technology itself, thinking about things like one-to-one ratios, mobility, moving to digital-centric experiences first. And most importantly, behavioral acceptance. There's been a lot of changes that have occurred in many of the different markets we're going to talk about today that have promoted growth and enabled companies to achieve scale. If you look in the sector, broadly speaking, 10 years ago, there was about $500 million of new venture capital that came in to fund innovative companies. If you look last year, the amount was 40 times that amount, or about $20 billion. You've had new public companies like PowerSchool with Hardeep, Coursera, Duolingo, Udemy. You have 36 unicorns that are present in this space. We used to be searching for one. And most importantly, it reveals to us, even with the presence of our attendance at the conference, so I've attended all the conferences since they started. This is the 13th. In the first year, there were 300 attendees. This year is 7,300. So we really are achieving scale in many ways in the EdTech space. It's an investable asset class. People are looking for allocations when you talk about private investors, public investors, and so it really invites the question, to what degree of scale can we really achieve when you think about global education technology? So why don't we start with the historical perspective? Some of you have been present in the space for many years. Some of you are newer to the space. If you think about what you've observed over time, what has changed and what are the causes of those changes? And then we'll talk a little bit about how that might vary vertical by vertical. So Adam, why don't I ask you to start?
Sorry? Adam's calling on Adam. It's a little hard to hear on here. So we'll try to have some fun with that on this panel. So my journey into EdTech started about 9 years ago. Prior to that, had a career in software and tech-enabled services. And so you come into the space 9 years ago, and I was part of a group we called Weld North, formed by Jonathan Greer, and we were investing really across the spectrum in K-12, higher ed, and lifelong learning. And it was all about meeting and chatting with entrepreneurs with an idea to help scale and to provide some capital. And the one thing I think we brought to the table, and I think in my time here at this conference, is there's some level of anxiety, being that these things take time. And it is about capital that needs the time to provide to entrepreneurs to make things happen. And I think if you're a new entrant in this space, there's been a nice little bubble, there's been a big resurgence, there's been a lot of excitement, there's been amazing deals, even more amazing valuations. But how are the products that you build and support really working? How it is affecting learning, whether that be K-12 or across the spectrum, and do they really work? Because it takes a long time. And then there's a tremendous amount of of innovation every single day. So to be a sustainable company over time, you have to really invest significant capital into your product, because at the end of the day, in this space, it's similar to the real estate play. There are three things that matter. The three things that matter in these businesses, on all of our businesses, are products, products, and products, and that they work, that they work, that they work.
Hardeep, why don't we get your perspective? Tremendous experience in technology coming from Oracle. You spent years building a successful business at SumTotal, and now with PowerSchool. What have you seen change, and maybe what are the causes or drivers of the change that are revealing scale opportunity?
Yeah, I actually started my journey in education 12 years back, starting from that side of corporate learning, right, running SumTotal and then higher ed and now K-12. And really in the 12 years, if you look at it, there's a commonality between all the broader learning aspects, which is basically, there is a paradigm shift on how all of us are learning, right? How we are interacting, how it's no longer the necessity of sitting in a classroom and just sitting all day for a lecture. It's all about point in time. And our K-12, that's even more important because our kids are digital natives, unlike us, we're digital immigrants. And for them, that comes just naturally. That's how they want to learn. So that whole paradigm shift is really driving a lot of the excitement. And I still believe we are in the inflection point of this. The beauty is that we've got not only the tailwinds around the fact that there's a demographic shift, there's a K-12, higher ed, and corporate learning had been the laggards of investment, and it's got everybody's attention. We do think there is a lot more bigger things which are going to happen, as we've seen post-COVID. There is huge amount of opportunity in learning. How many school districts, if you have kids or nieces and nephews already in education, how many people were really aware how the kids were doing during the last 2 years? Very few people had the data and insights to understand how kids were learning and what they were doing. That whole impetus is now really waking everybody up that you got to do a big, broad digital transformation. And the fact that now we have huge amount of money flowing in, you've got bankers like Goldman Sachs at this conference, which you got everybody's attention that this is a great area that is going to really be the transformation. I won't take this. I think the old guys made a comment that the next couple of years, the biggest companies in the world are going to be coming from the EdTech. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity, which is true.
Anjali, you're newer to the space. Tell us a bit about what attracted you, and as you think about opportunities to deploy capital, what kind of thesis do you follow?
I think a lot of it is building on what Hardeep and Adam have already said. It's around a lot of the innovation and product changes in the space. It's something that is what's really exciting from Skillsoft's perspective. We've made a lot of progress. Skillsoft started off shipping CDs to people back 20 years ago. That's where the space started for Skillsoft. Now we have a platform where we train learners with AI recommendations, and a lot has changed, and yet it still feels like the space has only started to scratch the surface. And so that's seen with the GSV 200, with all of the new ideas coming in. And so for us, how we think about deploying capital is really around what are the new innovations, the new products, the technologies that matter to our customer base. So Skillsoft is an enterprise corporate learning focused company. What are the things that matter to both enterprises and learners? Where is that combination really being expanded upon? And so one of the things that we did last year was make an investment in the digital coaching space. And that was a space that had recently moved to a digital-centric model, had previously been entirely in person, and is an example of how EdTech and the definition of it keeps expanding. And I think that's part of what makes it exciting to be here.
Absolutely. Rich, you've spent time in a lot of different verticals in education technology over your career.
Yeah.
If you think about, we have great representation today, early learning, K-12, higher education, lifelong learning skills. How do you see the differences in those sectors? Perhaps what's changed or is changing, and where are the similarities that you can apply if you're thinking about scaling in the vertical broadly, and then perhaps on a multi-vertical basis?
Yeah, I think that I'll start with the similarities, Adam. I think what is similar in terms of what has changed over the last 10 years is the monetization potential. Historically, when I joined the space about 12 years ago, there were very few, especially in the space I play, which is the B2C side of the businesses, there was only a handful of companies that were able to monetize at scale. And scale then was defined as like 10 million in revenue, and now it's defined as hundreds of millions in revenue. And so I think that the lack of monetization, the lack of business models to monetize great products and offerings, that's changed across all of those different verticals. I think that's the first piece of it. I think the other piece that has also changed is that across the verticals, we're all starting to, I came from K-12 and now I'm in higher ed. And because the companies have scaled and are at such a large scale, it's no longer a single product or a single space, but we're all crossing over into each other's verticals. So for example, Course Hero, via some of our acquisitions, whereas we are primarily in the college space, we're now very much playing in high school. And with our acquisition of Quillbot and Scribber, we're now in the writing space, which gets us also into the more adult learning space. So I think, Adam, there's more commonalities than differences within those different verticals.
Krishna, maybe you can tell us a bit. You founded Tynker over a decade ago. As you think about, most of us, when we refer about the market for skills and coding, we're thinking about young adults perhaps going to an alternative path to higher education, or they might be in higher education and they're complementing their skill set. And you really took an entirely different approach, which is to focus on children and investing much earlier on in the development of the analytical skills that go into coding and the understanding of technology. Tell us a bit about that, because I think it aligns with this concept of the lines are blurring in how we define learning and digital experiences. And as you think about vertical or multi-vertical strategies, there are a lot of overlaps where the ability to address a wider addressable market is present because of the fact that we can touch people at different learning points and experiences across the entire continuum of their life.
It's a long question. I hope I passed it well. But I mean, I started Tynker as an experiment to kind of help my own son to kind of learn coding. That's how, as a passion project. And over the 10 years, very early on, why should kids learn to code, to it's now, kids should learn to code. And that transformation happened among, consumers. As well as lots of shifts happened in terms of device coverage and children using, applications, different kind of apps to learn. Teachers are deploying these apps to kind of teach in blended classroom learning. And so all of these factors, and I think they got amped up with COVID, that actually normalized blended learning or remote learning. And from those are the changes, tectonic changes actually, at least I've seen. Now we don't, nobody tells us like, oh, my child doesn't want to learn online. So there's kind of that shift has happened. In terms of coding in itself, very early on when we started, I used to get these questions from teachers saying, I teach math and science, and what is it in it made for me to teach coding? To lots of changes into kind of blended, how do you connect different subjects to coding and teach, so that actually leads into alternate, job paths, like as they get into high school. If they don't take AP exams, they can still choose career paths in technology. Those are the things that I observed. I'm not sure if that was an answer to your question.
No, it's a great response. I think it actually starts to highlight, and richer comments as well, one of the things that we've seen evolve in the space, which is opening up more opportunities, so more addressable markets, more ability to scale, is the emergence of balance in traditional B2B models and in the direct-to-consumer model. And over time, what we're seeing is some convergence of the two. So for every Imagine and Skillsoft and PowerSchool, there's a Course Hero, there's a Tynker, there's a BYJU as a parent. And we're really seeing the changes in technology fuel new opportunities for learning experiences. So Anjali, Skillsoft just acquired Code Academy. Skillsoft traditionally a 100% B2B enterprise SaaS model. Tell us a bit about that and how you're thinking about shaping the experience in a broader way for learners.
Sure. I think the definitions of what has been B2B and B2C have always been interesting. I think part of the thing that we've realized over the last several years is that ultimately what matters is what are the learners getting? What are users on the platform actually learning? How are they learning? What are the outcomes that they're seeing? And then that drives a lot of what value is provided to organizations, it drives the value that's provided to the individuals as well. And so for Codecademy, our acquisition with them is really about extending the offering that we have in the IT skill space. And they've been historically B2C. They've built an amazing platform that's hands-on learning first. They were one of the first to do it, and that adds a capability to enterprises that they might not otherwise be able to get as good access to. And so being able to combine something that's been really consumer-driven with a platform that enables enterprises to have the admin capabilities, the reporting, the ability to extend that to so many more people is really exciting. And then in addition to that, it brings a strong brand presence and D2C motion that helps individuals at a much younger age and much earlier points in their career know about Codecademy, know about Skillsoft, and that when we think about what enterprise go-to-market looks like today is increasingly important in the IT skill space, where learners are getting more of a demand for what is being brought to them by their teams. And that's important. Learners should have a say in what they're getting as part of their learning experience at a company.
Krishna, maybe I'll present the question to you. Obviously, you built a very strong direct-to-consumer business. You're part of an organization that's a very substantial global direct-to-consumer business. Do you see longer-term connections to build a parallel institutional business where you can leverage either the brand equity that you have or the specific content you've developed?
I think longer term, we want to provide content and services to B2B businesses, in our cases, the schools, in a lightweight format, affordable format, so that so we can bring equity to the all children, and the ones that need extra attention. That's also a channel for us to kind of reach through a brand to reach direct to consumer as well. Because if you look at the very early learning space, whether K to 5, predominantly the students aren't discovering these services. They're discovering through B2B, or our parents are discovering through media. So that's a strategy that we will employ over time, but predominantly BYJU is a direct-to-consumer business, and they use brand to kind of educate consumers.
I'm listening very intently to the answer of your question, coming from the B2B K-12 side. I mean, while there are similarities, that it's about learning, at the end of the day, it's a student in front of curriculum, hopefully curriculum, instead of just content, because there's a big difference between the two. There's tons of content, there's tons of free content, OER content, but as an institution, if you're selling into an institution, it is about a curriculum, it's about moving forward around standards. And selling it is very, very different. We have a small consumer business, and we love looking at some of that content and moving it into the consumer side. But selling into districts, particularly in the United States, and then every country outside the United States has its own method of how they buy curriculum and how that moves forward. And so I think over time it will evolve, but it still has a long way to go, and it is quite different.
Can I jump in too?
Absolutely.
Right. Well, I'll maybe there's a lot of great stuff which is happening in both D2C and the B2B work, right? But let me ask a question from our audience. How many of you have kids? Raise your hand. How many of them actually want to spend more than 1 hour after their homework and school on anything supplemental? Okay, one kid, right? So great for
Overachiever.
Right. So look, I've got 3 kids, and I can tell you I can't get them to touch anything after barely getting their homework done, right? I think there is a value here to really bring these things together to make this contextual within what's happening in the school. And I think it's a little bit different in global markets in India and all that, where the kids actually do spend more than 2 hours after their homework and school and supplemental stuff, but it's not necessarily all other markets as well. And I think there is need for us to bring some of the exciting stuff which is happening in the D2C globally into the US market as well. But within context, what we call personalized learning, we got to build it into almost that homework needs to be personalized, right? Rather than being a straitjacket. So that's where I think we have a huge opportunity. The next 5 years, 10 years, I think that's where, for us, these two models really collide, and that's what would be the exciting.
While I agree with you and the hands raised, we've, in 10 years, we've spent $250K worth of marketing spend. Our entire B2C business is built on the fact that kids actually, when they touch the product in the schools, come home and actually build stuff that the parents discover and through which we were able to monetize. So I think there are I agree with this thing in terms of time spent, but if you provide solutions that are interesting for students, you could build alternate models as well.
I completely agree, and I think that's what I say, this is really good to see, and especially take example in coding. Look, I just signed an initiative with code.org with among 100 other CEOs who are sending a note to the governor saying we need more coding into the schools, right? Exactly the point. I think we've seen that areas which are not done properly in the schools, there are pockets of D2C which have been very successful, but we got to figure out how we integrate that into the normal school cycle as well. Otherwise, we are putting kids through a lot more challenge to kind of balance this thing, and they're definitely motivated kids, but we want to bring equity of that across the entire, every child, and that's where I think the intersection to me is very important.
How those kids are supported and with a great deal of privacy and security. I mean, that is a big difference around it. I think that is, one of the biggest topics in the B2B K-12 space.
I mean, every one of the companies represented here on this panel has achieved very significant scale over time. And I think when for entrepreneurs or investors who are thinking about how do I map that path to scale, there's often the first thing to think about or where the direction goes is how do I define my TAM? What's my addressable market? How can I expand my addressable market? So, a question I have for the group is how do you balance seeking additional addressable market, expanding your products or your solutions, and focus? When you think about the value of staying focused and true to a particular vertical or particular strategy, direct-to-consumer, B2B, even in direct-to-consumer, we often separate between direct-to-parent and direct-to-consumer because they're different. But if you have advice for people who are building businesses, how do you find the equilibrium point to where you're focusing in execution, but always thinking about how to expand your business?
I can use Course Hero as a case study for how we do that. Course Hero is Andrew Grauer started it 15 years ago. It's what I would characterize as a horizontal platform for college students where they can get expert help on homework, exam preparation across hundreds or thousands of course-specific content. What we're doing from an MA perspective, is how do we help students in more ways? And so, for example, our verticals business is around reading, writing, and math. And so that's how we're expanding our TAM in terms of finding new parts of the student journey and be able to serve them better. And so we've acquired, for example, in reading, we've acquired lit charts as well as Cliff Notes. In math, we're going deeper there with Symbolabs. And I think writing is the best example because, again, that expands our TAM because we go outside of our core college piece and into writing. You start very early in elementary school all the way through adult learning. So I think that's an example where for us it's going just deeper, expanding our TAM as well as our LTV. So you can both stick to your core, but you're augmenting your core business strategy by getting into, in our case, new verticals.
I would actually focus on one model. If I were to go back and redo it, I wouldn't have done selling into schools. Just focus on one, that gives you a tremendous amount of, executional strength versus like picking money from both ends. When you're early on, I mean, when you get to scale, maybe there are opportunities out there. And that's been my experience at least.
Yeah, I totally agree. For the entrepreneurs in the group, I'll use an example. We acquired a company out of Glasgow, Scotland recently called Twig Education. And it had been hanging around doing some good work for a decade. But they decided, the entrepreneurs in that team said, we're going to go after science, and we're going to go after it in an adoption state in California. And they killed it. They beat a large number of the big publishers who are moving into that space, and they made a name for themselves. But they were nowhere when they were very broad. They got very deep, and then we found out met them, fell in love with them, and brought them into our team, and then are evolving it. So, as a smaller organization, be totally focused. And then as a larger organization from the TAM side is, adjacencies are amazing. And think about then a build versus buy assessment around those. And our view is we could have built that science, but it would have taken us a couple years. And so then instead we bought.
So I think to your question about TAM, to me, let's start with the number, $10 trillion, right? That is the global education market TAM based on the last survey on Holland IQ. So I know you wanted fireworks on the panel, but I think we have enough room for everybody to really grow. And if you look at the complementary nature of the business models and you look at the solution sets, there is enough TAM for all of us to really be able to really address that. It's one of the highest spend categories in any other industry. Take example, within US, we're spending between B2B and B2C, it's almost like $900 billion. That's higher than any other discretionary spend category. So I don't think it's a concern about the TAM. It's about, how, to your point, still about the focus, right? We all have our key areas, and where the exciting part is that while there will be large companies which will form, I think the partnerships are going to also dictate how the success that's going to happen. So it's important to have a focus, but it is also important for us to really work together. Otherwise, we don't take full opportunity of the difference what the end consumer wants. So I think that's where the opportunity is for us to come together rather than really competing that.
And just to add to that, most of that time is going to Google and Facebook.
Not today. So
Maybe in 5 years.
Well, no, I think, Hardeep, your comments actually raise a really interesting observation about the education technology market, which is that it's one of few sectors where you see balanced growth globally. So when you take a step back and you think about the drivers of growth in education technology, it's pretty fundamental. It's demographics, economic growth, policy, and technology. You take those four things, you go anywhere in the world, and you're going to find growth in education and education technology because they're all interrelated. So when you think about scale, and so again, balance of focus, execution, part of it is how do I define my addressable market? Part of it is how do I define my value proposition? Part of it is how do I define my channel? For the global opportunities, when you think about what scale has been achieved today and how much can be achieved, how much does globalization and just global growth play a role in that opportunity? And Krishna, I'll start with you because you've built a tremendous organization. You're part of a tremendous organization that now has very global presence. So tell us a bit about how you think about those things internally and how you map your global aspirations.
I think from a parent company perspective, global aspiration is huge for BYJU's. They've been the leaders in India, and they're looking at, different geographies to buy these leaders in these spaces. And in what happens there is trying to, for example, Tynker would never have been able to grow in India. And it's just not, we don't have the skills and local market knowledge, and to some extent the same with BYJU's back into US because they don't have the local knowledge. So combining that if you have a global strategy, that acquisitions are a primary way of dealing with it. So you get and because of these different market conditions, we learn a lot from them, how they've done. For example, in terms of services, they've added on so many, like in the last 10 years, EdTech has changed from just software only to software and services. So they know how to deliver at scale, and we've never done services and adding on services layer. So those synergies come in place, and so in trying to get whatever cliche 1 + 1 is 3 is what these things can accomplish, and at least from our side.
Rich, maybe I'll direct the question to you. When you think about where you're present today, where you might aspire to be present globally, what kinds of things export or transplant well, and what kinds of things are specific to the local markets, which really creates a linkage to what Krishna was saying about understanding local business practices, local distribution, et cetera?
Yeah, so again, I'll use an example. We just closed this week Scribber, which is an Amsterdam-based writing company. And so when we looked at that company, we looked at it in two ways that translated. The first was just their reach. We don't have, like Krishna said, we don't have capabilities in Europe. And we think that's an important capability, and it's a very valuable audience and path for us to expand the TAM. They didn't have capabilities in terms of building recurring revenue, subscription, monetization engines with the business model. All of our businesses are recurring revenue, B2C. We have massive distribution, 3 billion visits. And so what translates is they needed distribution in the US, they needed monetization expertise, and we brought that expertise. And similarly, they have capabilities in terms of markets that will have just taken us much too long. We're very humble. We can't build everything, and we certainly can't build expertise in lots of markets.
We've seen something similar at Skillsoft where we think about how do we expand into local markets, especially from a content perspective, because a lot of what Skillsoft develops is content on a great platform. And the platform that's easily leveraged in other markets, the pedagogy, the curriculum, those can be leveraged. But when you think about how do you approach the content in a way that makes it engaging for learners, how do you bring them in, have them see themselves represented, that comes down to localization, which can be done. It's something that we look at from a M&A perspective. It's something that we look at from an organic investment perspective as well. And localization is not just the translation of content, it's thinking about it in the context of the cultural dynamics, the representation. So there are many things that can be leveraged. I think to your points, a lot of the go-to-market components can be really unique and need partners in areas to bring that expertise, and the same can be said for some of the product components as well.
Thank you. Hardeep and Adam, I'm going to come down to you here because both of you have participated in you've built big businesses, and I think it's been achieved through a balance of organic investment and inorganic investment. And a lot of times when we talk about expansions, transformational opportunities, new geographies, we're talking about M&A, but M&A is always preceded by sort of the build versus buy question. So how do you think about, Hardeep, I'll start with you. You come from a product development background. How do you think about organic investment and balancing the build versus buy and the opportunities and risks that are inherent to each?
Sure. I thought if you count going back who did more acquisition, it might be Imagine Learning, right? We did 14. I don't know what your count is, Adam. So, all right. So I think I do want to kind of maybe address just the globalization, and then I'll answer your question on this. I do think education is one area which does transcend borders. I think the value of education, how we are teaching, and even in COVID, as we have seen, the challenges of classrooms not being open and the social emotional toll or the learning, that gap was felt globally, right? So I think we've kind of seen that the need for education tools, the need for better alignment and learning, I think does transcend globally, and I think it is definitely what we're seeing now is really, that's why you see a lot of global companies across the board shaping up. Now to your point about, okay, how do you get there and from investment, look, we've done 14 acquisitions, but I also spend 120 million per year on R&D, right? And I have 100 partners in my network, and I have 1,000 integrations I offer from our system to all system, right? So we always approach this to kind of relate to a experience would be is think about we're trying to build the iPhone of education. We want to build the best experiences within which are seamless, that provide you the most important function you need day in, day out, and make it simple that a 2-year-old and an 80-year-old can use that in an easier way. But at the same time, we're also building that app store that we're not going to be doing everything. And there's tremendous amount of innovation and work which is getting done globally. We want to bring that channel of all that exciting stuff to every child. And that's a marketplace, lined with the simpler experience so that we can really do that. So our model is we don't look at it necessarily that we got to go build everything or we got to go buy everything. For us, it's like if we think that we can improve the experience and keep it simple, then absolutely we'll build that organically or inorganically. But at the same time, we're very aligned on the partnerships to kind of really provide the best experience our end users need.
And one of the best acquisitions you did was the one we sold you, right?
Yes. Absolutely. We just had LA Unified sign up, so thank you, Adam.
You're very welcome. We missed that business. But maybe it's an interesting story for the group because at the time, we were focusing on digital curriculum and software tools to facilitate the learning process. And those are kind of two different kind of models. And so we decided that we would double down and focus on digital curriculum. And at that time, we sold our professional development and assessment business over to PowerSchool. So that provided us more capital, more focus on net new. Now, what we do, and we have we're pretty similar sized businesses, similar R&D type budgets. There are only so many things you could build concurrently, and I don't know if our chief digital officer is in the room, Gotham Parasnas, but I always ask them, how many teams do you have that you're building these products? They're all over the world. There are over 1,000 developers, and then we're going to see something else that is really interesting and saying, all right, well, is that company, would we be a good owner of that business? Can we provide distribution for that company that they don't have? Can we provide capital that they need to grow? And then we'll add another one on. It adds complexity, right? M&A is always hard. You have a big people dimension around them. And what do you integrate and what do you keep separate? And those are the things we think about. And then we're going to say it's speed to market. So at the end of the day, what's the best way to put our capital to use?
Rich, let's keep coming down the line here. I want to build on that, which is, despite all the opportunities for organic investment, you still come across new innovative companies that are interesting opportunities to acquire and expand or do something incremental. How do you find the balance of strategy, which is prescriptive, and actionability, which is when things can be potentially acquired? And how do you avoid the friction where actionability influences strategy?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's super hard because it's something we're wrestling with right now. We've prioritized the different verticals, for example, that we want to go into. And frankly, without disclosing too much, number 2 and 3, they are just not actionable assets. Hopefully you can help us with that. But
we're working on it.
They're just... And so we see the TAM, we see how it lines up with our overall corporate strategy, but they're just not actionable assets, or in some cases, there are actionable assets with, there's not alignment on valuation. And so that's another layer that also...
It's multidimensional.
...shifting rapidly. But having said that, we still stick to, there are just certain capabilities that we don't have. I said earlier, we're humble. We're not going to try and build everything because that has its own risk. Building great products has a lot of risks as well. And so it's tough. And what we do is, in some cases, we just double down on what's working, and we try to really further penetrate and accelerate those verticals where there are actionable, and just keep our eye and keep our ear to the ground until some of these, it's changing so fast right now, so a lot of opportunities.
Krishna, you've built an incredible organization, 250,000 in marketing to reach 60 million learners. It's pretty good. Help the audience understand from the perspective of an entrepreneur that has built a very successful company, what are the kinds of things that you reflect on if you're presented with the potential opportunity to either be acquired or to join a larger organization?
So, I mean, every entrepreneur sets out to build a company that goes public and makes a huge global impact. In my case, in my 10-year journey, I had 3 or 4 M&A opportunities from, you can think of the top companies. The very year 3 and year 4, when that opportunity presented, I said no, because looked at, what can be built, where we are in the journey, and our capabilities of executing that, our strategy. But as COVID hit, and last year, for example, I got lucky, and there was a, foreign corporation that wanted to buy, and I said no, and the government's put kibosh on that for them. But when finally this decision came for me, BYJU's, I wanted to stay in education business, and I wanted to be part of Tynker has no shot at going public. We don't have that revenue numbers, and I had to make this tough choice of what's the best thing for us, where do we want to be, and there's multiple options on the table. And having talked to the founder and the ambition they have and the scale they have and what they can bring to the table, and I was able to convince my team and say this is the right strategy that we need to be part of if we want to stay in execution. That's the at least the decision-making process that I went through from Tynker perspective into, selling into BYJU's.
It's such an interesting perspective, and it has a very personal dimension to it. We've got about a minute left here, and so I'm just going to ask each participant to comment. When we think about M&A, most of the time what we focus on is the product, the financial impact, and the valuation. When you think about those, and then reflecting on your comment, Krishna, the last component, which is culture, how important is culture, even though it frequently doesn't arise on the list and it's very qualitative in nature?
It's huge. It'll kick you out of it if you don't merge cultures. The companies, that's where the M&A fails.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that if cultures don't align, then that's where you have, from an acquirer's perspective, huge retention risks. And from a business combination perspective, execution risks. If your teams can't work together, the entire thesis falls apart.
I would just say we start and finish with the entrepreneurs. We're more akin to a VC model where we structure deals where we want to build together with the entrepreneurs. And so we don't have a model where we're just integrating, taking cost savings, taking it and folding in our roadmap. So if the entrepreneur, it's got to be two-way. If we don't want to build with them or they don't want to build with us long-term, it's not going to work. It's a non-starter for us.
Yeah, of course, it's immensely important. I think what's key is you're not going to meet companies that have the same culture of you. You need to look at what is their culture, and then how does it evolve within your infrastructure, and then how do you run that business within your umbrella to leverage the secret sauce that they currently have.
I won't take anything away from everybody says, and I completely agree. But I would add one thing on education is, well, the beauty of our industry is the reason every entrepreneur, every company who's in education, they're really excited about the purpose and the impact. So when you start from there, the culture alignments actually become much easier because you're all driving towards the same goal and the impact you're making. So we've found this to be very encouraging, is that purpose is what binds us, and a lot of time we find a lot of opportunities, even we're coming from different backgrounds, but they're really aligned to purpose to kind of really take it to the next level.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to say thank you to everyone for your insights. Congratulations on your success, and thanks to everybody for taking the time to listen today.
Thank you.